So we're going to finish up with middle childhood cognitive development when we get back, but I thought I'd go ahead and move on to social and emotional development in middle childhood. Okay, so I know I said this before, but middle childhood appears to be the happiest times pretty much of our lives in a lot of ways. And they talk about it as being naively happy, that we are not at the point yet of puberty and that all the emotional stuff that comes with adolescence and those changes and those hormones, the frequency of negative emotions have declined, and injuries and so forth, as we talked about, have declined. And they've learned a lot of this from this thing called the experience sampling method, coming from Reed Larson and several other people, including Csikszentmihalyi, and I'm blanking on the other guy. That what they do is they wear a wristwatch, and it basically, or something that looks like a wristwatch, and it beeps randomly throughout the day, and the people rate their emotions, where they're usually on continua of like happy to unhappy or friendly to angry, and these kinds of continua. But you can see that in middle childhood, they're rating themselves on the happiness scale as very happy 28% of the time, and that's going to decline by about half as we move into adolescence and deal with some other more mixed and more negative emotions. Their happiness is something that when they get upset, when something happens, like they lose a game or they get in trouble, that it's more of a, this is what I'm dealing with right now, and then they get through it and kind of move on. Those concrete events that pass. And so at this point as well, we've been developing some emotional self-regulation all along, but it gets pretty good at this point, and it needs to, because, right, we're sitting through school all day. A lot of children at this point belong to different organizations like the Girl Scouts or the Boy Scouts, different civic organizations, but also maybe on different teams and athletic groups, or join a music group or take music lessons. And so a lot of the day is sort of spent controlling a lot of those emotions. During middle childhood, they also start to develop, or they become much more aware of this emotional ambivalence, that we can be really happy about something, maybe happy for somebody else that they received some prize, but then disappointed that it didn't come to us, or vice versa, right? My team won, but my sister was on the other team. And so this emotional ambivalence, we become better at understanding this, even though we mentioned this before as having it with our siblings and so forth. We already had it. We just understand it better. And so children also learn to show the appropriate emotions, and so conceal their emotions to a large extent. If I get a present that I'm disappointed in, but I was led to expect something bigger or I'm more excited about, I can just say, well, thank you, instead of like being upset or just really showing my emotions about it. I can be polite and kind of pretend to be happy and pleased with this a bit. And I'm going to skip over to the Asian children learning the concept of face. So this is really the same kind of thing, but in a lot of ways much more intense, that there are certain situations where they know they're supposed to show certain emotions and they're not supposed to show certain emotions. And so there's much more of a concealing these emotional ups and downs out in public, and a lot more of the like smiling and saying thank you so much for something that you know that you didn't want. And so because we are able to do this better, we understand that we have to do this better, we also understand that other people are doing this as well. And a lot of this is reflected in our increased capacity for empathy, or it is maybe reflecting our increased capacity for empathy, that we can hide our own emotions to some extent while we are being there for somebody else, like really showing that I'm unhappy that somebody lost, even though I just won, my team just won. We are also developing our self-understanding, our self-concept, where this becomes a much more realization of our psychological self, and that we are different in different situations, all of that kind of complexity in early childhood, a lot of times kids are describing themselves as the physical appearance. I'm short, I have brown hair, long brown hair, and glasses like that. And maybe toys or certain activities that like a game that they play. But now they're really starting to use some psychological characteristics, and it might be that I'm shy, but it might be more complicated even of the psychological characteristics of I'm kind of shy and quiet at school, but when I get home I'm pretty raucous and I play a lot of loud games and I'm much more active and out there. We are also engaging in social comparison. So I'll come back to the fact that this is Erikson's industry versus inferiority stage. And so we are really comparing ourselves to other children and on a lot of different variables. It's not just that I'm comparing myself in one way. This is one of the reasons I said I feel like intelligence tests could test for a wider range of abilities, because if we can see what we're good at, right, we can have that bit of, hey, I'm better than other kids at this, which is helpful for us at this age. I do try to get people away from social comparison as much as possible. Our school systems also promote this social comparison that we're already kind of ready and willing to do. But it becomes much more, as you can see, we've learned seriation, right? So it becomes much more, I'm the best in my math class, except for 2 students. Like, so it's much more like I can definitely tell the smallest, the next, to the tallest. I can do this serial kind of comparison, right? And I can also say I'm the best in my math class, except for maybe 1 or 2 kids, but maybe I struggle with writing, or I'm slow in reading, or whatever my other skills or not skills kind of are. I'm okay in physical education. I'm kind of like in the middle. So they have a much more clear ability for social comparison. And it's really influenced by age as well as social context. And so a lot of the times we'll see the majority culture has a pretty strong influence on how the various minority cultures feel. And there was a study done back in the 40s that I'm going to say they replicated in the early 2000s, where white dolls and black dolls were offered to both white children and black children, and both groups of children chose the white doll to play with rather than the black doll, and they both labeled the white doll as the good doll, and it says in quotes, and the black doll as the bad doll. And I'm not sure if that's considering, I don't know exactly what context they were trying to get with the good and bad. But I think that was also replicated in the 2010s. I'm hoping that this is changing because of not just the fact that we have more different ethnicities sort of available in different roles in the media, but also, and so we're seeing a lot more of variation, but also that there are more dolls available. So I know in the 1940s, or I'm pretty sure in the 1940s, it was mostly that the white dolls were available as well, and so the black dolls would be something that was new. And I would have hoped in the 2010s we would have seen this change quite a bit, but apparently they found similar outcomes. Okay, we are also developing our self-esteem, again, part of the industry versus inferiority stage. In the United States really values high self-esteem, and we have a slight dip in self-esteem as these social comparisons are starting to be made. We also have our global self-esteem of what we really feel about ourselves overall versus academic competence, social competence, athletic competence, physical appearance, and those go into our global self-esteem. But really it partly or mostly is what is important to us. So if academic competence is what's important to me and I'm doing well academically, then my global self-esteem is likely to be relatively high. If academic competence but also social competence is really important to me and I'm not doing as well socially, that might cause some dip, right, in self-esteem because of that comparison, that I'm not doing as well socially as I am, say, academically. And also in the United States, physical appearance is very important at this age for both males and females. They do have this little section on the culture and the self, and how these more independent cultures versus collectivist or interdependent cultures view self-esteem really differently, and how we in the United States rate ourselves as higher in self-esteem, and there's actually there's a few developed nations where we see this, we rate ourselves higher in self-esteem, and this has happened where it's higher and higher historically over time, whereas other cultures, they don't rate themselves as high, but they also don't see it as this is something that I want to rate myself high in. And in fact, I think they gave us the example of a Taiwanese study where knowing that you should conceal your achievements is something that starts to happen around this age. I'm going to say one more thing about that, even though I left that slide, just because I don't want to go back and start over. So remember the interdependence, and so part of that is that it's the group harmony that's really important, right? It's my family, it's my group, my nation, my religious institution. It's my groups that are important instead of me personally. We also see gender development occurring. So gender roles become more sharply divided in a lot of ways of what we are doing with our time, and as well as how we see ourselves. So in developing nations, children are really likely to be starting to help their parents with whatever their parents are doing. So the girls are really likely to start helping their mother with certain things, maybe making tortillas and going to sell those tortillas, cleaning up around the house. Boys are really likely to be helping their fathers with certain things. They did talk about one nation where it is the boys who watch the younger children. Sometimes that's the girls. It really depends on the culture. Boys are likely, though, to be going with their father to work. Although we're going to see where this is to some extent changing. That we saw that in the cognitive development piece. Generally, we're learning more gender-specific tasks. We're socialized to develop gender-appropriate personality characteristics, and boys become much more. They want to keep with those masculine characteristics, whether it's dominant, achievement-oriented, and those kinds of things, whereas girls are going to use some of the more feminine gender adjectives like nurturing, caring, compassionate, but they also, girls tend to, especially in developed nations, add some of those masculine traits like achievement oriented. So we're not shying away from the masculine traits, we're just adding the feminine traits. In developed nations, we do get that certain personality traits belong with certain genders, and certain occupations become more associated with certain genders, as we saw that developing earlier. And I did that with the wrong slide again of the masculine traits, masculine activities that boys increasingly avoid those activities that might be considered feminine, and girls often add those masculine traits. And I'm not going back to remake slides. I've already done that a little bit, and I don't want to do that anymore. So, I've said that before. We do see that play becomes more gender segregated. And I've mentioned this a couple times in class, and that now when they are playing with each other, it tends to be this quasi-romantic and antagonistic kind of play, which Thorne calls border work. And so the book has this example of their daughter coming home and saying, girls go to college, get more knowledge. Boys go to Jupiter and get more stupider. And I had not heard that one. That's obviously a newer one. But I remember the border work time of this being where it's like we're getting ready for adolescence and having those relationships, but we're not ready yet. And so I just remember being on the playground and just slapping a boy and running. So it was antagonistic, quasi-romantic in an antagonistic kind of way, and we all do that differently. Obviously, that was not the way to do things, and not completely common, but not uncommon. Or co-regulation is seen across cultures, and what this means is that parents are They know where their children are. They have an idea of what their children are doing, but there's less need for this direct moment-to-moment kind of watching over their children. Children cognitively understand rules and regulations better, and they have better self-regulation. So we talked about the lap child, knee child, yard child, and that all cultures pretty much think until the age of 6 or so, this reasoning, this kind of reasoning isn't there, but by middle childhood, we can see better reasoning, better ability to follow instructions, some use of decision making. So parents are letting them go more, letting them self-regulate more, and they explain more often why they have the rules that they do, because children can understand, and so there's less physical punishment. Again, across cultures. Children are allowed to play farther from home. Boys in traditional cultures, and this used to also be true in a lot of developed nations until pretty recently, and still there's definitely some variation in families. Boys have more freedom than girls, partly or mostly because girls have these daily responsibilities that they are helping their mother with cleaning, with cooking, with the things that need to be done around the house. We see diverse family forms. So just in the United States, we see 63% of children this age are living with two parents, whether that's biological parents or adopted parents, or adoptive parents. 21% live with a single mom. The rest live in other family forms. And so this is a wide variety of non-parental relations like grandparents, but also cohabiting parents, a parent and a step-parent. The latest, or the 2010 U.S. Census found that 20% of gay couples and 1/3 of lesbian couples were also living with children. So once all of that became legalized and easier to adopt children, we see that's been on the rise. We see children being born to a single mother is becoming much more common for African Americans. This is over 70%. We see in other developed nations as well that this is becoming more common, but to a large extent they are much more likely to have it be the single mother but a cohabiting parent. They're just not married.